Hello and welcome to PentaLive from Pentalog, where we talk about some of the tools companies can use in the era of coronavirus and COVID-19 to not just survive, but to thrive. I'm Peter Green in New York, and today we're going to be talking with Guillaume Pousseau, who is Director of Customer DevOps Services at Pentalog, and he helps clients develop the best IT infrastructure for their needs. We'll be back right after this, and Guillaume will start explaining what that's all about. Welcome back. This is what we call DEFCON 19 on PentaLive from Pentalog. I'm Peter Green in New York, and today I'm welcoming Guillaume Pousseau from Paris. Bonjour, Guillaume.
Bonjour.
Guillaume is going to hello. Guillaume is going to talk to us about DevOps, which in a word is about infrastructure, but a whole lot more than that, as Guillaume will explain. To give just one sense of what that's about, we're in this terrible coronavirus era, and we all know that no matter how many vaccines a country suddenly tries to introduce or how many they don't have a really solid healthcare infrastructure, and the two don't talk to things don't go so well. That's where DevOps comes in. Tell us, what exactly is DevOps?
Okay, so hi Peter, hi everyone. DevOps should help just what happened with your connection. In fact, so DevOps is a movement that has arisen since 2007, but kind of came before. It's a movement that tries to enhance collaboration between all the specialties working about building digital products, but in particular developers and operation engineers and specialists. So I would say developers and CSOPs, mostly infrastructure specialists. It's also based on agile practices, agility, lean. There is a quote that I like very much from, I forgot his name, sorry about this. Sorry?
Gene Kim.
Gene Kim, thanks so much. I'm not needed in this conversation. So yes, Gene Kim, for whom DevOps is making IT platform faster, safer, and easier to change.
So DevOps sounds like something out of Mission Impossible. You know, we've got our DevOps team, and they're going to parachute in and rappel down the side of your servers and fix everything with their machine guns and plastic explosive. It's not quite like that, is it? What exactly does DevOps do? And it's not, you talked about agile and lean. Agile and lean have handbooks and templates all over the place about them. DevOps is more a way of thinking than a checklist or a template, right?
Absolutely. So that's the whole complexity, and that's why it's kind of hard to apprehend the concept. As I mentioned, DevOps is a movement, so there is no real guideline. In fact, it started as some kind of thinking effort from a Belgian engineer who met and started to collaborate with people, especially in the US, regarding those topics that I mentioned about enhancing collaboration in projects and increasing the role of agile in those teams. But in fact, DevOps is, I would say, a philosophy of work that was already kind of applied in major IT companies at the time. And there is many ways to achieve DevOps. So there are many companies that pursue this path, but they do it in a different way. So that's why I defined DevOps as a movement. And just to extend a bit on the complexity of the concept, nowadays some people even use the word DevOps to design a role. So a specific kind of engineer who works on infrastructure and trendy technologies, such as cloud platforms. So DevOps has become a mixture, and this is why it's so hard to understand the concept. And it's even harder because there are no rules, as you mentioned, such as in Scrum.
Well, we often, we look at software development. That's where all the hot stuff happens, the quick response to customer demand. In the agile thinking, you're doing these scrums and sprints and other things where you do very short-term, object-focused work, constantly checking what you're doing, constantly probing your weak points as you move towards a finished product. But from what you've been explaining to me, and this never really occurred to me as an end user, that same approach is rarely used for developing and testing and keeping infrastructure able to support the programs and software and applications that are on top of it. And I guess this is part of what DevOps is bringing that software thinking into the infrastructure thinking. Maybe you can talk a little about how you integrate those two. Absolutely.
So, yes. The reason why DevOps has started to arise and those workshops happen and there was some reflections about it is because there was a huge lack of collaboration between teams, a huge silo between developers and other type of specialties. Why? Because they have different type of technologies they work with. Developers usually work with, always work with programming languages on their local computer, and they push it once they have finished. They are expected for changes, so new features, new functionalities. They are closer to business, whereas infrastructure specialists work on machines, on servers, to set them up, and they are expected for stability. They are here so that to make sure that things won't break and users can continuously access the digital platforms or product. So this is a huge gap between the two kind of specialties that this practice try to improve and avoid. So the common ground was to and is to enhance the collaboration and onboard DevOps and the collaboration within the team with a set of principles. So maybe we can talk about the CAMS pillar. Yes,
I was going to ask you the 4 pillars of DevOps, which culture, automation, measurement, and sharing, which people call CAMS, C-A-M-S.
Yes.
Maybe you could walk us through that as a way to conceive of how to apply DevOps to your operations.
Absolutely. So you're right. So CAMS is an acronym standing for Culture, Automation, Measurement, and Sharing. There are many, as I mentioned, there are many ways to achieve DevOps. There are many definitions, many attempts to try to, bring some kind of coherence. The CAMS pillars are some of the most popular, and in my opinion, they make a lot of sense when you start the journey. Culture is very important because, as I mentioned several times, collaboration is very important, and you enhance collaboration through culture. You bring a common culture in your team so that they work together toward the same goals and with the same means. So culture means also is close to sharing, which is at the end of the acronym. But people should share, should collaborate, and share their impediments and work so that everybody understands each other. And there is more coherence within the team, more coherence in the way you design the product. All of this might sound very theoretical, but once you start to experience it, when you start to see people working together as a team, it it's awesome. I mean,
it's really
believe that
it breaks down the silos that you were talking about between the software and the mainframe or the backbone people.
Absolutely, because for anyone who has been in this business and who has knows those conflicts between developers and other type of engineers, they are very frequent because people there is often a culture of finger pointing and of responsibility that is negative, and people try to avoid responsibility, trying to throw it whether on process, whether on the other one. So many often, as a CTO myself, I heard developers saying, it's not my problem, it's breaking on production, it was working on my local computer, it's the responsibility of the infrastructure engineer. Whereas, on the contrary, the first reflex of the infrastructure responsible will be to say, hey, but the server was working, it must be a code issue. So before even investigating, they start to, the first reflex is to start throwing the stone over the fence. And when people collaborate, they work together, they anticipate those issues, they embrace the risks, so we will talk about it later, and they try to find the issue all together, and this is the way to go. And just to continue on the two other pillars, so we have automation, which is very important, and I think it's one of the core attraction of DevOps nowadays, and one of the reasons why DevOps is so much adopted, because nowadays there is more and more technologies that leverage the capability to automate the process and the workflows in the development, and they really accelerate the pace of deliveries. So I could name many tools, but mainly the most famous are the tools that are designed to accelerate the development pipeline until they are deployed onto production. And all this process can be automated, made much safer, and made much faster for the teams. So there are numbers, there are a lot of different type of surveys nowadays, and performed by Google or by Puppet, which is a famous product. And they say that elite performers in DevOps, so they try to rank the level of maturity of the teams they onboarded into their survey. And for those who are the most experienced and seniors within those DevOps practices, they are said to develop 208 times faster than people on the bottom of those practices. So
wow.
There is really a value of it.
Yeah.
And then for the last pillar, measurement. Yeah. So this one, I'm not very comfortable, but it's to say that, but it's kind of an attempt to bring some kind of scientific approach. Sorry for my accent.
Scientific approach for all you non-French speakers out there. Yes.
Thank you. And for the scientific approach to measure and to understand the infrastructure and to share among the team, and to have in mind to have a continuous improvement within your process and within the capability of your infrastructure and digital product as a whole to react. So this is especially important in those times, because when there is a crisis such as the COVID, the habits of your users are changing, and the needs that drive your technical products are changing. So you need to adapt as fast as possible. So that's why those measurements are so important, to understand and adapt as soon as possible.
Right. So we're in this era where all of a sudden IT infrastructure, application delivery, suddenly, you have a bank. Well, people used to walk into their branch and talk to a branch manager who had the specialized software with the corporate interface that was not nearly as maybe user friendly. And all of a sudden, your bank has to switch to a entirely consumer-based backbone, which means people will take longer to make the same request because they don't know how the system works. They need new software or new applications running on top of it, but you don't have 2 years to go out there and spec and buy a whole new set of servers and a whole new infrastructure. You've just got to layer this on very quickly. So how does this work? And we talked briefly previously about things like the importance of a DevOps approach to working with things like Amazon Web Services, because you can scale up very quickly with AWS, but if you don't coordinate and have a DevOps approach to it, you might end up phone that is not ready to handle it.
Yes, and since you mentioned AWS, I think it's very important to say that I believe that the trend of technologies right now in the digital world are to mix more and more infrastructure and programming. If you look at the latest tools that are released, such as Docker, such as AWS and cloud that you mentioned, that brought themselves new type of programming, such as serverless, which is a way to design your architecture by splitting your program and your code within functions that are loaded as single and sole and independent entities on the infrastructure that is supposed to run them separately. So you design your architecture in terms of pipeline where you have separate functions that work completely separately. And this makes totally the work of developers with infrastructure. And if you look at how AWS and Azure evolve, I believe that they open more and more their services to developers directly. So you need less and less the classical syshop who had to go onto a machine with his console to type some commands that only he would know. And more those infrastructure, they are abstracted and designed for developers to work directly with them. But still, you need some competence to understand, because there is a richness of service. There is a complexity around how you can set up all those services. And that's why DevOps as a role starts to make sense here, because there is a new specialty to handle those platforms. And this specialty is in between the world of ops and developers. Mm-hmm. Sorry, maybe I digressed a bit from your question.
I mean, this is what we're trying to understand is, exactly where does this come in? Because a lot of companies have neglect the whole concept of their infrastructure. Oh, well, it's on AWS or it's on Azure or it's on some other server. Somebody else maintains it. We don't have to worry about that. We just develop our new app or our new SaaS or whatever, and bam, we put it up there. Mm-hmm. But in fact, a lot, and I've seen this in a previous workplace where they had their own, everything was done internally, but the application developers and the mainframe maintainers were always at war with each other, and you'd say, well, why isn't my terminal working? And they would say, oh, those guys in software came up with something that doesn't work when all of you people try to use it at once. Like, well, what was the point? Yeah. So I think that's very important that people understand more and more the integration of all these aspects of IT, mm-hmm. Particularly as we are going to be now really reliant on this. I mean, look at, I hate mentioning names here, but look at Zoom. The fact that it's got a great interface, but man, is that infrastructure doesn't work when you've got 45 people on a Zoom call. It's not always working. You saw me break up a little earlier here on Skype. There are issues that need to be built into both ends of the system, and if they don't talk to each other, it doesn't happen.
That's so true. That's so true.
But one of the issues, just sorry to put you on a slightly different question we raised earlier. Mm-hmm. One of the big issues for this is risk. Software developers are always happy to take risks. They create crazy stuff. It works. It doesn't work. They keep refining it because it doesn't go into operation and nobody's affected. until they actually unroll it. Whereas with infrastructure, it's constantly working, and you've got to be very careful to make sure your whole network doesn't fall down or your whole operation doesn't fall down. So there's a built-in aversion to risk. But you were telling me earlier about some companies that, like Netflix, that make risk a key part of how they develop their systems, both the applications and the infrastructure.
Yes.
Sorry for speaking so long, but yeah.
No. Thanks for elaborating the question. So you're absolutely right. I believe that DevOps embraces risk in a completely different manner than how we were used to manage risk before. So there has been a practice in the world of programming and the digital world for a long time called fault tolerance, where the effort was to adapt the technical platform to risk, and rather than having it shut down completely, or the evil blue screen that we saw, every one of us saw once, at least once in our life. There was already some attempts to try to mitigate issues by having some automated response from the system. And with DevOps, the leveraging of automation and those automated tools, you have more and more ways to overcome issues by adapting your services to problems. And the fact that you can mix programs with infrastructure creates a whole new synergy that overcome risk in a very, very new fashion. So you mentioned Netflix. They have a practice called chaos engineering, or they call it chaos monkey, where so it's based on fault tolerance, as I mentioned. So for example, in a classical business, when your authentication service is going down and people cannot authenticate anymore, usually you will shut down the platform, because you believe that users can't use it anymore because you can't track them, you can't manage their access. So the usual way you will proceed is to shut down the platform. In Netflix, it's the contrary. They will open the platform to everyone because they consider it's a higher risk for the business to shut down the whole platform and make their subscribers angry than to open it for a few hours to everyone. And this is the principle. So Chaos Monkey,
because if they leave it open for a few hours, you may have some hackers who then decide to subscribe. So what have you lost?
Exactly.
It's that kind of thinking, yeah.
Yeah, so this is, the Chaos Monkey is based on this thinking. Let's try to have, for each issue, let's try to have an automated answer and an appropriate answer. And based on that, they have a strategy, and they try to provoke chaos on their product all day long, all the time. So they have automated tools that are breaking Netflix on purpose. So while you are watching Netflix, there are tools behind the scene that break services. And Netflix is testing its way to react to failure with all the time, all day long. And it works because there was two major issues with AWS. They are hosted on AWS in the last few years. And Netflix is one of the platforms that resisted with almost no downtime or no impact on their infrastructure, because they have the capability to auto replicate and redirect traffic on other geographical zones, and they had the ability to self-heal or restore the service very fast. So if they had corrupted services, they had the ability to have them being shut down by themselves, and the new services to be restored automatically. So all of this, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have chaos monkeys in my own home. They're 2.5 and 5 years old, and they test our systems all the time. I'm not sure that it's necessarily quite as useful to the family business as what Netflix is doing, but the concept makes a lot of sense of chaos monkeys. I just want to interrupt for one moment here. If anybody who is listening or watching this webinar or whatever, our webcast, has any questions, please put them in the chat. And our producer, Christelle Loiseau in Brooklyn, with a beautiful view at her window, will read them, and then Guillaume will try to answer as best he can.
Yes.
You have a question.
I have one. Hey, Guillaume. You mentioned a few, but maybe we can repeat it. Someone was asking, what are the most well-known companies for DevOps practices?
I would say that the most famous would be Netflix, but this is arguable. Actually, all the major IT companies are doing DevOps. So Amazon, Netflix, I already mentioned it several times, Google, Microsoft with Azure, Etsy, all the major companies are doing DevOps. Facebook, you know.
And you were mentioning some of the platforms that are proposing their services. So there is AWS, there is Azure. Do you have other examples? Maybe just a few more.
Yes. So I mentioned the major, those major two. We could also add Google Cloud Platform as a third one, because in my opinion, they are the ones that leverage the most and innovate the most in those trends of DevOps and automation. They even have for Azure and AWS a certification called DevOps Solution Architect or DevOps Engineer. But you know, to a lower extent, you have many other companies that are pushing for automated services. There are some older one like Heroku that also proposed the platform. So it was a platform as a service designed for developers to avoid the layer of having sysops to manage server. There are many examples, many cases of different type of platforms. There are also technologies that leverage automation, such as Kubernetes, but really Azure and AWS, I think, are the leaders there in terms of innovation, and that explains their incredible growth those last years.
Right, thank you, Christelle. Thanks, Guillaume. I have another question for you, Guillaume. So if I'm a CTO or within my company or in charge of some major piece of developing or delivering IT services, how do I, and we're not already thinking in this DevOps mode, what are my strategies for getting the rest of the C-suite and also for getting the rest of the IT team to come along? Because I mean, you mentioned the silos before, and silos often have internal political. They become an internal political force that has to be dealt with. The competition between one side and another. So, what's your advice to a CTO who'd like to push this forward and have more of this DevOps approach?
Yes, so sorry about this. I will sound like, for the first time in my life, like a star who is selling a book or a new movie in those talk shows. But I will be conducting a webinar next week to present how to introduce DevOps in a project. It's kind of a complex topic. It's like bringing agility. There are several ways to do that. My advice is to do it very short, but you need lots of time, obviously, is to first ensure and spot the business advantage of taking this path. You should at least spot one, define one precisely. Then start with quick wins to motivate your teams, to motivate yourself, to motivate the people who invest, because it's an investment to move. It can be a long path to raise the excellence of DevOps. So those quick wins can be, there are, I mentioned the continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline. So you can add some tools to accelerate, that are easy to implement. And then you can go for more and more architectural changes. And at the same time, make sure that you have your team motivated to take this path. So there are certifications, there are programs to certify as DevOps. Try to mix your team, try to mix the specialties within the team to increase collaboration. This takes long. That's why I also advise to promote measurement, and I come back to the CAMS pillars, to have a proper governance in place, to track the progress, to have metrics and KPIs, to ensure that people are kept motivated, that the acceleration is met, the objectives that you pursued with your DevOps onboarding are met, and have quick, fast, and short objectives. Work iteratively. It's an agile, it's a derivation of an agile methodology, and that is becoming very, very popular nowadays. It even has children. You have data ops, you have AI ops, SecOps. It's becoming so popular that it's eating more and more fields. So you don't even need to restrict it to developers and infrastructure. You can also enlarge it to other type of specialties that you have around your digital product.
Wow. Guillaume, thank you very, very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for DEF CON 19 on PentaLive from Pentalog. We were speaking with Guillaume Pousseo, who is the chief, let me see if I get this right, tell me your title again. He's the guy in charge of DevOps and implementing it among their customers. So that's why Guillaume knows so much about this, and he spent about 15 years working as a CTO in various companies, so he really knows this stuff inside out. And our producer, Christelle Lezeau in Brooklyn. Thank you both.